what happens when we replace the worship of God with the worship of sex? What happens when we worship the creation rather than the creator?
Right.
What happens when a group of people, a society, a culture decides to remove God from the throne and place sexuality on the throne? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of the Identity Crisis podcast, where we endeavor to give an answer for the hope that lies within us, yet doing so with gentleness and respect. I am your co-host, Jaylen Thompson.
Dylan Schweitzer.
Dylan, first of all, we got to acknowledge there's something different about you, man.
Yeah, I shaved this week.
Oh.
That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. That's what it was. That's what it was. Yeah, man, cut the hair off, huh?
Yeah. And I figured I was cutting weight right now and figured if I could lose an extra 3 pounds if I just cut my hair.
And was it successful?
Well, no. But I did get to donate a foot of hair.
Really?
Yeah.
A foot of hair?
A foot of hair all around. So
I don't think I've ever had a foot of hair.
Yeah, it looks about right.
Anywhere. I don't think I've ever had. Yeah, that's never happened. That's just never happened. I can't even fathom that.
Yeah, so I just kind of got tired of it, and it was time for a change. It was as you can probably tell, it's primarily in a perpetual ponytail, so
yeah,
it was just time to let it go.
I dig it though. I dig it, man. The new style is good on you, man. I'm digging it. The new do. So
what it do for today, my friend?
That's a good question. Deal?
Yeah.
Let's have the sex talk.
When I was 15, I think my parents already covered that, my friend.
Sure, they probably did.
Okay.
I think we need to talk again.
I still know how it works.
Let's talk about the results of the work.
Okay.
Yeah, there we
Fantastic.
go.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. Let's get into that part. So, when we talk about sex, when we bring up the word sex, first of all, everybody's minds goes everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Let's bring it in.
Everyone's cheeks get a little rosy and embarrassed.
Let's bring it in here, guys. We're adults, and let's have some adult discussion. Yeah.
I'm almost there.
Yeah. Right. Growing up, I'm close. But let's have an adult discussion here, about a very serious topic. Very serious topic. It's everywhere. Literally.
Yeah. Literally.
It's everywhere from movies to TV to adult TV series to cartoons. I mean, it's all over the place. And so I think it behooves us to discuss its context, discuss the effects that it has on our culture, where it is in our culture.
Yeah.
Let's see, has God said anything regarding it? Does he have anything to say about it?
Right.
And let's kind of analyze the results of our ideas and his ideas, and let's see where we fall.
Right. So I think a good starting spot might be is where are we today as a civilization and as a society? Do we have any information or statistics to kind of talk about different aspects of the human sexual experience?
Yeah, so we do. So I did some digging into some of the statistics of sexuality, in our current culture and our current climate, what we got going on. And I came up with a kind of a host of different statistics ranging from, sexual thoughts on for Christians, for atheists, people in general. It's kind of just all over the place. Just some general stats about sex and, just giving us a decent idea of the lay of the land, if you will.
Sure.
So on average here in America, people lose their virginities at the age of 20. No, I'm sorry. That's not true. It's not 20. 17 years old.
Okay. That's
according to the CDC. Some stats regarding Christians or those who believe there is a God or religious in some capacity.
Sure.
50% of Christians believe that casual sex is morally acceptable. while 50% say that it's unacceptable.
So it's kind of split.
Yeah, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Given giving the book or the teachings on sexual ethics that the Bible talks about, is very interesting to see that there is a split, a 50-50 split.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah. That's worth looking at later.
Yeah. Another statistic, 12% of young women and 40% of young men approved of non-marital sex in 1943.
Mm-hmm.
As of 1999, which is some time ago, but still reflective of what's going on today, 73% of young women and 79% of young men approve of non-marital sex.
Yeah, I bet, 23 years later, it's probably much higher than that now.
Probably even higher than that now.
Yeah.
54% of American teens believe that sex before marriage can enhance and strengthen romantic relationships.
Interesting. Okay.
Conversely, 94% of atheists believe that casual sex between consenting adults is morally acceptable, with just 6% saying that it wasn't. This is according to polls that were taken on different websites.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not these statistics were accumulated from a bunch of different places. Okay, so it's not like all of this information is coming from one place, and we'll put the links for these statistics in the description for the episode if anybody wants to check them out.
Yeah, they're more of like a guideline, not like written in stone commandments.
Yeah, exactly. 95% of agnostics had no problem with casual sex. That doesn't shock me. Making them the most liberally minded on the issue of any group in the survey that was given.
Okay.
57% of Christians generally said that sex in a committed relationship outside of marriage was morally acceptable.
Again, close to half. Again,
close to half. 79% of religiously unaffiliated individuals said that premarital sex was always or sometimes acceptable.
Okay.
So 80% of the group found it to be okay.
Yeah.
And then for wedlock births, we found out that currently nearly half of all children born in the United States are born into a single parent home.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a general lay of the land of where we are.
Yeah, in terms of perspective and opinions on when and what to do with sex.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're starting younger and younger. And we are becoming more and more liberated in the way that we handle sexuality.
Sure.
Which, well, for people who may not follow the sexual ethics of Jesus, well, all right.
Makes sense.
Right. Makes sense that you're liberal. But for some of these statistics, where we saw, half of the Christians polled, said that casual sex is morally acceptable. The other half didn't. Wow.
Yeah.
Makes
it sound like there's confusion in the pulpit or in the homes or something.
Something's off between what I claim to believe and what I seem to be practicing. So I guess the way we find out, is there a standard? Is there a purpose? Is there anything regarding this whole sexuality thing? We need to find out if God has said anything.
Yeah. And I would say a small disclaimer about the poll is, especially with opinionated polls, a lot of people identify as a Christian, but are more of a cultural Christian.
Sure.
Like, I go to church on Easter and Christmas because if I don't, my mom's going to nag me when we're together.
You got a point.
That sort of thing. I remember I've known so many kids who were Catholic growing up, but they never went to church or prayed, anything like that. They kind of had a casual, apathetic belief in the existence of God, but they would still call themselves Catholic or still call themselves a Christian, but their actions certainly didn't line up with their words by any means. The heart was not connected with their intellectual understanding of reality.
You got a point.
And so I guess that's also something to consider with these sort of polls is there's so many people who claim things but are not embarking in the journey of following Christ. They're rather just casually just lumping themselves in a category. And
Sure. I got to pick a group, so I pick the
Sure.
one I'm most familiar with or something like that.
Right.
Just
Like
for
Notre Dame's got a good football team. Sure, I'm Catholic.
yeah, sure, I'm a fan. Let me get a jersey. Right. Don't know
Right.
anybody on the team, but
Right.
I get it. Yeah, I get what you're saying. That's a really good point in terms of the intellectual integrity
Yeah.
of the polls. That's a good point.
And so that could be some of the reason for some of the confusion.
Mhm.
But there's also people out there who are professing Christians, but they aren't as well read in the scriptures as well.
Got a good point. So, well, let's get some clarity then. And I know one place we can go to get clarity.
Yeah, start from the beginning.
The beginning, and let's go to the book.
Yeah, so we got Genesis here. This is Genesis 1, 26 through 28.
Mhm.
It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'"
You want to talk about this first, or do you want to read the next?
I mean, yeah, there's so much we could say about that.
Yes, go ahead. Let's do it.
I mean, one thing that always pops out at me, and this is more of a newer revelation, no pun intended,
Mhm.
about this is the fact that there's such an emphasis on being made in the image of God, and then there's such an emphasis on what we are to rule over. And so oftentimes it kind of makes me think of like, what's the term when you believe the universe is conscious? Pantheistic?
Yeah,
right?
pantheism. Yep, I believe that's what it is.
And so there's that sort of aspect, or if we look at ancient Egyptian religion, the belief that there are physical gods that are lording over different natural aspects of the world, like God of the Nile River or God of the frogs, like pointing.
Yeah, God of the livestock. Yeah.
Right. And so, and making a clear distinction, because also this is the first creation text that we have in human history where it's not making that connection. And instead of saying that these animals and everything are attributed to the likeness of this sort of lower G God, instead it's extremely emphasized, now that I read it, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds and in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals. So there's extreme emphasis that the creator and his creation is working with the people that he made in his image to, in a sense, complete and work out his creation, which I just find to be really, really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, and we are the only male and female that he created. We are the only creation that was made in God's image and likeness.
Right, right.
Which is very interesting to point out, especially given the relationship, the ideal relationship dynamics that we're about to get into here in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. So I'll read that.
Sure.
So then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him." Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. And while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his mother and father and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." So here what we have is God's ideal relationship format in terms of building a family, and as well as establishing the guidelines for sexuality.
Sure.
So as far as has God said anything regarding sexuality? This is the foundation upon which we are supposed to view sexuality, through the male and female that God created, and through the construct or the context, the institution of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not two separate things. Sex and marriage at this point are not two separate things. They are one in this. They are to be viewed together,
right,
in the same context,
equal parts.
Equal parts.
Yeah, and actually, a fun fact about this passage. So, if you look at a lot of Hebrew scholars, the word "helper" here, because oftentimes you'll hear borderline misogynistic statements about even this context, saying that she's supposed to be a helper, as if like a butler,
Sure,
or a maid or something,
an assistant, if you will.
Right. Yeah. But if you look at the Hebrew word for helper in this Genesis context, it's more akin to a military leader. And so this isn't just some random person who's coming to help you like a butler, but this is someone to take charge with you and to subdue the land and take dominion over the land, using some more of the Genesis context. So that's just something I like to always put out there, because it can be, when you just look at helper in our modern eyes, it's really easy to think of it in a different way. But the Hebrew says something drastically different and far more compelling.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's a really good point. So now that we have the God's ideal relationship dynamic between a man and a woman established, what's the purpose of sexuality?
Sure. No, that's a fantastic question. So we could frame that in two different contexts primarily. We could look at that biologically, and we could look at that theologically. So the general purpose of sexuality in general is to be able to procreate and to perpetuate the genome, to keep our DNA flowing, create offspring, to keep healthy humans going, and really in any other species, the same concept along. Theologically, sexual desire is supposed to be a gift. It's supposed to be a gift that is shared with a husband and a wife to take dominion over the earth, to take part in the creation process with God and flesh out his creation. It's kind of funny. The Creator created the world and created us to help us make little creations to finish his creations. It's a big creation story.
Lots of creation going on.
And sex is a beautiful gift that God gave for married couples to enjoy. I believe it was Paul who said that the marital bed is sacred.
Yep, sacred and undefiled.
Exactly. So those are the primary reasonings for why we even have sexuality.
Okay, gotcha.
And also, if it wasn't exciting and fun, we might not do it. So I guess that's important too.
Yeah, that too. Right, that too. And we want to highlight too that sex within its proper context, within its proper boundaries, if you will, is a beautiful experience to be shared between a man and a wife. Or a husband and a wife. I'm sorry. And it is designed as such to not only just obviously procreate and create more people, which creates more families, and which creates more communities, which creates more nations, which
so on and so forth.
So on and so forth. It is also designed as an act that is to forever join the husband and the wife in bond forever. It's this idea of consummating a marriage.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That act is what it's supposed to do. Is it's supposed to be almost like the signing of a contract, the signing of a covenant, which is essentially a contract. That is supposed to unite a man and a woman forever. This is why a man should cleave to his wife, leave his mother and father, cleave to his wife, and the two should become one flesh. The consummation of marriage, and in that consummation of marriage, when we join together and become one flesh, we can't now. What's supposed to happen? Let's talk about the ideal, right? The ideal is we're supposed to be one until death do us part.
Right.
And
not till death do us kind of bored and he's not around.
Yeah, or something weird like that.
Something weird, yeah.
And so, that's what's supposed to happen.
Sure.
The ideal is that sex is supposed to be something that bonds us together forever. And also something that we are to enjoy in our relationship, to help marriages flourish. Create children, like I said, and continue to build up societies, communities, and nations. And it also, when done in the right act and when done within its proper context of a husband and a wife, it actually glorifies God, because it's us taking part, once again, like you said, in the creation process, as well as what marriage is supposed to do. Is it's supposed to reflect the relationship between God and His people.
Mm-hmm.
Paul says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church."
Right.
And in that relationship dynamic, what husbands are supposed to do is husbands are supposed to reflect God, loving his wife, the church,
Mm-hmm.
God's people, in such a way that we are illustrating and illuminating God's love for his people to a world of people who won't open the Bible.
Yeah, and not even another thing to layer on top of that is, what did God do for the church? Christ died for the church.
Very much so.
It was an extremely self-sacrificial love.
Yes.
In means of connection and sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you could take that literally, like take a bullet for your wife, but that's such like a surface level
Very
analogy
much.
of the text.
Agreed.
It's supposed to be more like every act that you do in life should be in sacrifice to do what is best for the marriage and the family.
Mm-hmm.
And though we all fall short of that every day, with God's grace, we can do that and be able to sacrifice and do what is best for the family, and ideally the marriage.
Yeah, and ultimately that worship and glorifies God. But
I get it.
We have we've
Ruh-roh. Transitional moments.
We've come up with our own ideas, right?
Oh,
as it relates to worship. Deal. I kind of wanted to. I'm honest. I want to stay on this idea of worship, right?
Okay.
This worship of God, because here in America, I don't think we worship God anymore.
No, not really.
I think it's pretty safe to say that we worship sex.
No, he didn't.
Yeah. So
okay,
let's talk about this idea of worshiping sex.
Yeah. So what is worship?
That's a good question. So there are several definitions for the word worship in the Bible. That can be combined into one general definition that you and I kind of sat together and came up with.
Yeah.
And ultimately that definition is to consider worthy of ultimate priority.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so because in the Bible, I believe there were 5 or 6 words used for worship.
Yeah.
Each of them had different meanings
and context.
Yeah, in different contexts. But I think they can be summed up into one general definition.
Yeah.
And that's to consider worthy of ultimate priority.
Right.
So let's be clear here before we talk about the worship of sex in general. Everybody worships.
Oh yeah.
Even though I know, there's the atheist. I don't worship anything. Oh yes, you do. Everybody worships something. Everybody considers something of ultimate priority.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get anything done. I mean, just look at from a psychological standpoint, the hierarchy of values. There's something at the top that you are working towards, or you're going to go insane.
And that is what is worthy of worship, worthy of ultimate priority.
Yeah.
So everybody worships. Okay. But here in Scripture, as it relates to let's talk about the Bible for a second. God makes it clear that we are to worship Him and Him only.
Right. For our benefit.
For our benefit.
Specifically.
It's not just because
he's not some dictator who needs it. And be clear, God doesn't get anything out of that deal necessarily.
No.
It's for our benefit when we glorify God and learn from Him and praise Him. There's something beautiful that happens within us that He bestows upon us. It's not like God needs it, like it's Dracula needing blood or something like that. I think that's a common misconception out there. God doesn't need worship. He declares that we ought do it because it's good for us.
Sure. But what happens when we replace the worship of God with the worship of sex? What happens when we worship the creation rather than the creator?
Right.
What happens when a group of people, a society, a culture decides to remove God from the throne and place sexuality on the throne?
Interesting.
What happens when we consider sex worthy of ultimate priority?
Yeah.
Well,
it's a great question. What would it look like?
I got some answers.
Uh-oh.
Ready?
It's going to sound a lot like today, isn't it?
Well, let's go through and find out. So when people worship sex, marital rates plummet and divorce skyrockets.
Okay, sounding familiar so far.
When people worship sex, families are destroyed.
Yeah.
When people worship sex, and I might get in some trouble for this one, but so what? Blended families become the norm. I'm a part of one.
Yeah.
And my blended family is beautiful because of God's grace and mercy. But we're talking about what's going on now versus God's ideal.
Yeah.
Right? When people worship sex, men become women and women become men. It's all wrapped in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a part of the same thing. It all falls under the sexuality umbrella.
Sure.
Right? When people worship sex, men get to participate in female sports. That's what happens when we worship sex.
Mm-hmm.
When people worship sex, institutions like Planned Parenthood get established and are celebrated. That's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
When people worship sex, you get slogans that sound empowering, like "My body, my choice," even though you already exercised choices with your body when you had sex. But okay, anyway, let's move on. When people worship sex, people say things like "Your body count doesn't matter."
Oh, getting in trouble now.
We say things like "It doesn't matter who I slept with before."
Sure.
When people worship sex,
Uh-huh.
Even though the studies show that when you have multiple sex partners before marriage, you're far more likely to divorce than somebody who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also more likely to report sexual dissatisfaction in your marriage when you have multiple sex partners before marriage.
Yeah.
That's what happens when we worship sex. But we celebrate that
Mm-hmm.
when people worship sex, right?
Yeah, you get it, Queen. Slay.
Yeah. We celebrate and praise things like we celebrate song lyrics like "I don't cook and I don't clean, but let me tell you how I got this ring."
Oh, I must have missed that one.
Yeah, you did. But I heard it, and that's what we get when people worship sex.
Or we get great acronyms like WAP.
Yeah, that's what happens when people
Being a chart buster.
Yeah, and that's what happens when we worship sex. These are the type of things that come about. Children get invited to drag queen shows when we worship sex.
Hey, if you don't believe it, literally just Google it. There's hundreds of videos.
Look it up. I'm not making this up.
People who are drag queens dancing, twerking in front of like 9-year-olds.
Yeah. That's what happens when we worship sex. When we worship sex, public education systems find it beneficial that elementary school children understand the difference between oral sex and anal sex and the act of masturbation.
Yeah, as early as 2nd grade.
Yeah, we find that to be beneficial information for elementary school kids when we worship sex. When we worship sex, parents have to go to school board meetings and read books that their 2nd grade children are reading about two boys giving each other oral sex in the book.
Yeah, and again, sounds unbelievable. Check it out. Honestly, it's out there.
Yeah,
I know it's happening in Chicago, specifically the lesson plans with oral sex and anal sex. I mean, it was in the paper.
Yeah,
thank you, Pritzker.
Right, and also, speaking of Chicago, when people worship sex, you find recordings of principals who are found saying that they thoroughly enjoy the fact that they are teaching sexual education and LGBTQ curriculum to their students, and they bring sex toys to the school for their students to pass around.
Man, this ain't something to play around with.
Yeah, no pun intended, please. And so, this is what happens when sex is worshipped. This is what happens when we worship the creation rather than the creator. Families are destroyed. People are emotionally just warped.
Mm-hmm.
Sex trafficking runs rampant. Women are objectified.
Yeah.
And used for you only as good as you look. I just thought of another off the top of my head. When people worship sex, OnlyFans is in business.
Right.
That's what we get when we worship sex. And so and it sounds a lot like America in 2023, doesn't it?
Yeah. Paint a pretty clear picture.
And so here's where we are. So that's enough of that for now.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Sex is viewed extremely high. It's the highest priority for a lot of individuals in America, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it's gotten so far to the extent that it is the means in which we identify ourselves. You know, we think about the whole pronoun situation, and so much so that it's getting into like legislation to the fact where it's a hate crime if you don't use someone's proper pronouns and stuff like that, like in places like Canada or like California and things like that. Where, and I, you know, forgive me because I'm just a straight cis white male, but I just find it baffling that we've reduced the beauty of defining ourselves by what is greatest and highest, most beautiful and true, being made in that image, but rather I'm defined by who I want to have sex with. I'm defined by same-sex attraction. I'm a lesbian. I'm defined by or homosexuality or bisexuality or pansexuality or and you can look it up. I mean, there's like I think one of the national websites says there's 77, but there's always new ones. And so the way that in which we proclaim who we are is who we want to sleep with at the end of the day. And I just find that so sad because what a waste. I mean, sure, I emphasize for those who are struggling with that because I can only imagine the confusion that's going on. But people, you are so much more than who you want to sleep with.
You really are.
You are beautifully made in God's image, and to reduce yourselves by genitalia and who you want to sleep with you're just so much more than that. And I think it stinks because the depression rate around the LGBT community and mental health rate is extremely low, and it's just sad. And I feel like that's a big cause of it, is because we wanted to equate ourselves with the sexuality so much so that now we're having parades and neighborhood districts dedicated to it. And that's the story. That's the narrative we're going with. And it's just, you know, I can't help but be empathetic and upset about that just because we are so much more than that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you brought that up because, you know, sometimes I would have conversations with people and I would always wonder, like with celebrities and mainstream culture, like, why does a person feel the need to come out and let everybody know what their sexual preference is?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it important that everybody knows that about you?
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. I mean, let's say you know you're a basketball player.
Yeah.
People want to watch me play basketball, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you know me for. That's what I do. That's how you came to know me. That's how I gained the platform for you to even know who I am. That's how we gained access to each other. Is I play basketball and that's what I do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you need to know what I do off the court?
Sure, in your private life.
In my private life, my own bedroom behind closed doors. Why do you need to know what happens there?
I mean, what jumps to my head is we don't call it the kindness parade. We call it the pride parade. And so it's become like a badge of honor in a lot of sense.
Wow.
And so, and again, and I mean this as empathetically as possible, you know, so much so that we've reduced the vastness and the greatness that we can define ourselves to simply sexual intercourse as our identity. Of course, we need to overcompensate to feel good about ourselves. Of course, I need not a week, but a month to celebrate that. And if you don't, it's a big issue.
Now, you want to know something interesting about the Pride Parade? Now it's called the Pride Parade.
Yeah.
So numerology, biblical numerology, number 6 represents the number of man.
Okay.
And we celebrate Pride Month in the month of June, 6th month of the year.
Interesting.
So in a way, maybe in a spiritual sense, we are celebrating the pride of man.
The pride of life.
Or the pride of life.
It's interesting.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
How it ended up being that number. And what that number represents numerically in terms of biblical numerology.
And I guess to also tie in with the parade and everything, it's really easy to think, but America's a free country.
Sure.
We should be able to do what we want.
Sure.
And I would agree with that within reason.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we have forgive my language, but a bastardized view of what freedom is supposed to be.
Yeah.
I would say, if I was to give an analogy on what freedom looks like today, we often think it's frolicking in a field with flowers and daisies and the antelopes and nothing's impeding us.
Mm-hmm.
But freedom today is a lot more like jumping out a parachute naked. Or, sorry, jumping out of an airplane without a parachute naked.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, you have nothing restraining you.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's holding you back.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also kind of the problem. There's nothing holding you back, and where are we headed?
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah, there's nothing holding you back, and there's also nothing to catch you either.
No. And where are you headed at the end of the day?
Well, you're heading for the concrete. That's what.
Yeah, splat.
Yeah, that's what you're headed for in that context.
And so, I mean, if we use another analogy like bowling, if I'm a little kid, and someone puts the guardrails up, I don't know what I'm doing.
Sure.
I need those guardrails. Guardrails keep you out of ditches.
Yeah.
And so my parents, when I was 6, didn't put up the guardrails to subdue me and oppress me necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
It was by means out of love to help guide me down the correct path.
Sure.
Because the path I was going was just leading into a ditch. It was leading into not making anything on the board, doing anything productive and successful. And again, tying it back to the theological and the biological concepts.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just there thinking about use the bowling analogy with the guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes kids will get mad at a parent putting up the guardrails, right? And they're like, no, I don't want to. I want to do it without the guardrails, right? But little do you know, the guardrails actually guarantee that you are going to hit pins.
Wow.
They actually guarantee it. Even if the ball bounces from side to side, eventually when it gets, you're going to hit a pin, at least one.
Yeah.
So the guardrails actually ensure that you're going to fulfill the purpose of the game, if you will. Well, if we look at that from a biblical standpoint, with God in the Christian worldview, God's guidelines for sex and the context and the boundaries that he places around sex are to ensure that we experience the maximum benefit of it.
Right.
Right? And to guarantee us that we do.
Yeah, it's not a means of oppression.
Not at all. I'm actually trying to make sure that you fulfill the purpose,
right,
of the gift. But we've told God to take the guardrails off.
Exactly.
And God, being the gentleman that he is, he said, "Okay, fine.
You don't want a parachute? It's fine." And even with you falling, I'm still gonna sacrifice and give you one anyways if you would like it. I'm not gonna force it upon you either.
Right.
That's up to you.
Yeah, we've already gone through what happens when what has happened since the guardrails have been taken off, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But Dylan, I got another question.
Sure.
In observing our way of doing things, which we've already done, we've already kind of observed America here in 2023.
Sure.
And observing God's way of doing things, we were to do that same exercise with God's way of doing things. That's the question I would have, is if everyone followed the sexual ethics that Jesus taught, would society be better or worse?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by better or worse. I've thought of some ideas on what society might look like.
Sure.
And I'll list a bunch of things here, and I guess just a small disclaimer. There would be an extreme reduction of these things to almost zero. So to say there would be no this and no that, sure, there might be some percentage based on whatever variable. But I think most of these would come down to such an astronomically smaller number than what it is today.
Very, very minor issues, if any at all.
Right, compared to the epidemics of some of these issues.
I forgot to mention STDs too.
Yeah.
And what happens when people
That's
worship
okay.
sex.
That's the first thing on my list, actually.
Perfect. That works out.
If we were to truly take to heart, try our absolute best to uphold the teachings of the Bible about sex and sexuality, there would be no STDs because everyone would have one partner. No one would have to go to the clinic. No one would have to worry about syphilis or contraction or anything like that. Another thing was there would be no non-life-threatening to the mother related abortions.
Okay.
So that would be as we know, and you're welcome to look this up, 95% of all abortions are convenience-centric.
Right.
Which convenience-centric is, it's not the right time, I don't have the money, I'm still in college, or all of these other reasonings
Sure.
that we use to have an abortion, while the 5% or less are rape, incest, and medically.
Yeah.
So roughly 95% of those would likely be gone, because you would have a stable home, you'd be married, and you would have a foundation to raise the child, and you'd be way more inclined because you'd have support.
Absolutely.
Families would be primarily stable, and the rate of fatherlessness in homes would plummet to a shockingly near zero.
Yep.
Except widowed families, of course, because again, the outliers.
Yep.
It would likely reduce the need for welfare-reliant families as well, because single motherhood is financially incentivized.
So you mean to tell me Section 8 will be gone?
Possibly so.
So if we live out the sexual ethics that Jesus taught, there's no need for Section 8?
Possibly so. I think it would drastically reduce that need.
Sure.
And many other public programs like that.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't say gone. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say gone.
I think it would reduce the need as much.
Yeah, okay. I agree with that. Okay.
And so when we think about the fact that single motherhood is financially incentivized by at least our American government, depending on where you're watching this from, talking a little bit more about America here.
Yeah.
And along with divorce courts are kind of favoring the mother primarily when it comes to children. If we eliminate co-parenting, or the colloquial term baby daddies in general, there'd be an immediate boost in the family's income, and it would reduce the base poverty rate drastically, because now you're not having to be reliant on income from the state or the government. And because you make just enough and you have a little extra time to take care of the kids, so you only have like a part-time job or a low-paying job, you can now be a 2-income family, or at least have a husband who can take care of the bills, and you wouldn't have to be as reliant, or hopefully reliant, on the government at all to take care of those things. So because of the sexual ethics being rooted in marriage, and by the time you'd have children, you'd be in a stable relationship, the base poverty rate would likely be eliminated. Sex trafficking from predators or from people in the porn industry would be, of course, there would probably be no porn industry, hopefully.
Yes.
But sex trafficking would be pretty much eliminated if we followed the sexual ethics taught by the Bible and Christ. There would be no date rape at college parties.
Yep.
It would likely reduce the crime rate in general. Crime rate because of sex? Well, 3/4 of the prison population come from people in fatherless homes. And so it's kind of hard to believe, but when you don't have a strong male authoritative presence in the house leading and teaching you, of course we're going to come to our own conclusions. We're going to try to find community in probably the wrong places, love in the wrong places.
Yep.
It would likely eliminate the need to find validation through promiscuous sex as well, and lead to rates of higher self-esteem among teenagers. So it would help our mental health drastically. And to kind of tie that in, it would also eliminate the need for, porn models or models on Instagram. Because, and it's not like women are the only ones, but we do know there's an influx of women as Instagram models. But it'd be fitness influencers as well. We would no longer have to find our identity in posting half-naked photos on Instagram, trying to grab attention. And I guess side note, if you only like the way you look in the picture and you didn't do it for the attention, you wouldn't post it.
Correct.
You like, let's be honest, you'd like the likes and the heart reacts and the comments and the attention.
You posted the picture because you wanted people to see it and you wanted them to validate the picture.
Right. And I'm not saying that as an attack. I'm just being honest. Like if you really only wanted to take a picture and admire how you look, there'd be no need to post it.
Correct.
But it's because we're finding some sort of benefit from the attention and the seeming amount of love that we get from outside sources. Instead of finding our identity in Christ, we're finding our identity in being an Instagram model or some other form of a model. Also, the same analogy works for OnlyFans as well.
Right.
So, yeah, and so there's so many more that we could probably list. But it makes me think about cheesy time traveling movies with the butterfly effect. You touch a butterfly and all of a sudden a dinosaur's president. Joking. And so when we think about sex, we can do whatever we want, we're seeing the consequences. But if we really tried our best and took to heart a lot of the problems we see, whether it's poverty, crime rate, low self-esteem, mental health, divorce,
the lack of marriage,
the lack of
yeah,
marriage.
if we practiced the sexual ethics that Christ taught, you would actually see a increase in the marital rate, because there would be a driver for men, women alike to get married,
right?
So that I can enjoy the gift of sex within its proper boundaries,
right.
You know, I'm not saying people only get married for sex, but let's be clear here, it's a driver.
Yeah. So we could go on probably for like another hour listing stuff if we really wanted to, but I think that really puts a big, wide scope. And so if I was a doctor and I looked at all of those things, of course, those would be a great solution or good benefits from the solution. And so I think figuring out, well, what is the root cause of all of this?
Sure.
We could, do it surface levelly. It's like, and say, oh, it's because you're having sex with whoever you want. It's like, yeah, you could look at it like that, but I don't think that's the main issue. The sexual sin is not the problem. The act of sex is not the main issue. The problem is when we look at the hierarchy in our lives, we could say we worship sex, but if we're being more honest, why are we worshiping sex? It's because we want to be God.
Yes.
We want to worship ourselves.
Correct.
We want to put ourselves at the hierarchy.
Correct.
And so whenever you indulge in, whether it's pornography, promiscuous sex, and all these other things, you're likely not doing it for the primary reasons laid out biologically or theologically like we listed. So it's likely not for the procreation of the genome to push your DNA forward, and it's likely not to bask in God's creation and to work with him to produce a family, to cultivate and take dominion over the earth. The likely reason is it feels good. The likely reason is I get something out of it.
Yes.
And so I'm going to take advantage of this website. After all, it doesn't hurt anyone, we tell ourselves, but obviously it does. We think an insignificant act that doesn't cause violent harm doesn't cause any harm, but in fact, because on such a wide scale we have 7 billion people thinking the same thing, it's caused massive amount of harms in indirect or sometimes direct ways. And so the problem is hedonism prevails, and we threw away the restraints and threw away discipline, and our primary means, our act of worship in a sense, our thing that is most important in our lives that we're aiming towards and shooting towards is our own self-gratification at the end of the day. And that's the problem.
That's the problem.
It makes me think of a quote: if you're really anxious, you're likely thinking about yourself all the time. So think about others and help others. And that's honestly...
That's a quote, dude. Wow.
Yeah. We honestly, when you think about anxiety, you're stuck in your head thinking about you, and it could be a negative self-talk like, oh, I'm a piece of crap, I suck, or all this sort of stuff, or you're so obsessed over your problems and everything. But if you got out of your dang head and started helping others, well, you're out of your head for one. You're out and about moving, and you've changed the problem to your issue to someone else who is less fortunate than you are. You can now help, and in a way, that is the ultimate call to adventure, and that's what we're supposed to do as Christians. We're supposed to go out into the community and help people. We're supposed to fellowship with other people and help other people. And so, one of the most ultimate things you can do in this life is self-sacrifice and give up the hedonistic pleasure and give up these things that we once thought were delicious fruit, but we realized they were rotten apples in our mouth. And so I think the primary issue is we're trying to fulfill ourselves with a knife, and we're poking holes all over ourselves.
Yeah. So it's the misuse of sex it's a symptom of the disease. It's not the disease itself, what it sounds like what you're saying. So the disease is our sin nature, right? Disease is at the heart the heart of man's problems is the heart of man, right?
Yeah.
And it's the absence of the joy in our fulfillment, in being in proper relationship or being within the proper boundaries and guidelines that God has set for us to be in relationship with him and with others.
Right. Exactly. We could bask in what is greatest, what is most beautiful, what is true. But instead, we're focusing on a quick fix, in a sense. And the problem is it's always never enough.
The eyes are never satisfied.
They're never satisfied. There's not enough porn we can look at. There's never enough women to satisfy me.
Yeah, Solomon agrees with you.
Right. Yeah, Mr. 1,000 Wives.
Yeah.
There's not enough pronouns I could collect. There's not enough identities I could cluster. There's not enough OnlyFans models I could subscribe to. There's not enough sexual gratification to heal my broken heart by any means.
Absolutely.
And when we bask in something that is endless and limitless and powerful and loves us unconditionally despite all of these acts that we have committed, he actually bestows us the power to overcome these seemingly natural urges, actually overcome them, and to go on the adventure of your life, which is following Christ, helping others, being in communion with what is greatest.
Yeah. And when we do that within the context of marriage as it relates to sex, people who wait until marriage to have sex actually report higher quality sex lives than those who do not.
Yeah.
They also they report higher levels of satisfaction with their overall relationship than people who had multiple sex partners before they got married. They also report higher levels of mental and emotional stability in their relationship.
Yeah.
Than people who've had multiple sex partners.
So don't worry, it'll still be fun.
At the end of the day.
God's got you, bro.
God's got you. So that's the end of this episode. Make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you guys. The channel's growing, and I just want to say thank you guys. We're over 10,000 views now.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
Thank and praise God for that. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for your time. That's it for this episode. I know this was a bit of a long one, but we appreciate your time. And I am your co-host, Jaylen Thompson.
Dylan Schweitzer.
And as always, for the kingdom.